A fist hammered the wood, and a voice I helped raise said, "Open up, you owe us." In that split second, every quiet sacrifice I'd made, checks written, boundaries stated, health ignored, was recast as a debt. Not love, not care, a bill. I stood on the safe side of the lock and felt years of being useful harden into one clear line: I am not your plan B. The phone lit with accusations, the porch camera caught the performance, and the word family was swung like a weapon. That was the morning I stopped defending myself and started documenting. If you've ever been turned into a resource instead of a person, you'll recognize what came next, and why the end of my patience wasn't the end of the story. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from all over the world. Your comments create a community where storytelling thrives, and we're so grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. Now settle in, get comfortable, and prepare for a journey that will keep you hooked from start to finish. Let's get started. Cedar Street smelled like cedar because I made it that way. I planed the beams myself, shimmed stubborn joists until they stopped complaining, and rubbed the workbench with oil every April as if it were a living thing. The craftsman house wasn't grand, but it fit my hands. The shed out back still carried a slow drift of shavings I hadn't swept. When I woke before the gulls and clicked on the shop light, the old ledger waited with its ruled calm, a place to lay down what got built and what broke. Before the fall, life had the order of a tide chart. I was a Tillamook ranger reading wind and line, a man who knew where a fire would run if given a chance. Nora kept the school library with a gardener's touch, moving books like perennials, sun-hungry titles to the bright shelf, winter stories by the radiator. We weren't fancy, we were steady. Coffee, thermos, steel-toed boots. Her pencil behind her ear like a wand that could make silence behave. One bad afternoon unthreaded that order. I was on the roof throwing a tarp before dry lightning, telling my knee it still belonged to me. It didn't. Something tore with a sound I felt more than heard, and I slid 2 shingles before the gutter caught me. Surgery, then rehab, then the parade of invoices that arrive like tides you don't get to vote on. We watched our savings shrink into a shape that wouldn't carry us far. The numbers didn't care how the house looked in October light. Colin came with spreadsheets and concern, the kind that looks like love and math at the same time. "Sell Cedar Street," he said, not unkind. "Move in with us while you heal. Cut costs. We'll make this easier." "It's just for a while, Dad." I wanted to tell him a house isn't costs. It's a ledger of who you've been, but pride is lighter in theory than in a brace. Nora's hand found mine and pressed. "Choose the living people over the wooden ones," she said, quiet but firm. I nodded. I hated doing it, and I did it anyway. Packing is a kind of confession. I wrapped Nora's faded card catalog labels in tissue as if they were glass. I oiled my block plane one last time and slid in the slip of paper where I'd written its bite angle years ago. I turned the key to the shop and stood in the doorway, smelling resin and dust, every cut I'd ever made gathering into a single breath. The ledger went into my jacket pocket. Some things you carry on your body like an amulet. Colin's place outside Portland rose from glass and poured concrete. Daylight on every surface, a quiet that photographs better than it lives. The floor didn't creak. Sound slid instead of settling. His success was polished, and I was proud the way fathers are proud when a son builds something taller than his old man ever did. I was also cold, though I didn't say so. I carried our last suitcase down a hall that didn't smell like anything. Brooke staged the welcome like a magazine. Bowls of seaweed broth steaming clean, greens so bright they looked lit from beneath. She talked about circadian rhythms and blue light glasses, about melatonin and how almond milk is kinder to aging memory. "We're so glad you're here," she said, smiling in a way that could have been for us or her camera. "I set up the guest room and a little garage nook for your tools." I lifted the spoon and let the salt say what I couldn't. Nora found a compliment the way she always does, and the room loosened half an inch. The grandkids gave us the real warmth. June, 6 and serious, brought me a stack of old library cards and asked if I would stamp them checked in. Arlo dug into my coat pocket with blunt fingers and came up with a wooden peg I'd pocketed years ago. He held it like treasure. "Mine?" he asked. I let him keep it, because it was his now, because everything we hand to children becomes something better by being carried by them. Colin cleared me a corner in the garage. Plastic shelving flexed if you pressed it with a thumb. A thin mat to stand on, one outlet I would learn to share with a freezer of labeled organic meals, and a humming second fridge that wore a detox calendar like a uniform. I set my chisels on the shelf with the care of setting bones. The kit looked curated, not lived in. Life reduced to what could be zip-tied. That first night, the house exhaled a climate-controlled sigh, and the windows turned the city's glow into a soft wash. The cedar smell clung to my jacket like a note from a past life. I folded it and slid it under the guest bed because I didn't want the closet's clean breath to take it away. Nora brushed her hair on the edge of the bed, the rhythm unchanged by geography. We didn't say much. There is a tenderness in not making a room carry your worry on its first night. "Temporary," I told myself, a word I rolled in my mouth like a lozenge. "We'll manage," I whispered to the ceiling. We would heal. We would help our son like he thinks he is helping us. I would mend what I could from a corner of a garage that smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and kale. I would learn the way sound moves in a building that never needed nails hammered by hand. I would be grateful in the morning and useful by noon. I lay there, counting the pauses in the HVAC like I used to count surf between sets, picturing my workbench in the old light, the ledger waiting for a new line. It would not be forever. That was the promise. I set it on my tongue and tried to let it root. Before sleep finally took me, I pictured the house breathing on Cedar Street, boards answering the night the way old friends do, and I let that memory keep watch. In the new dark, I counted steadiness instead of sheep, the quiet promise that we were only pausing, not ending. The knocks came again, 4 hard taps that made the door camera flicker like a heartbeat on a cheap monitor. My phone lit in chorus. I let it ring through once, twice, a third time, then faced the screen long enough to read the name I already knew. Bree, the preview line was a fragment sharpened into an edge. "Your crazy father won't open the..." I put the phone down like a hot pan and drew a breath through my nose, counting to 4 the way the rehab nurse taught me. Counting is a lever, it shifts weight from impulse to choice. I touched the door camera instead. There they were. Evan, shoulders hunched into his jacket. Bree, jaw set, one hand lifted to the lens like she could talk it into compliance. 2 kids draped across luggage as if a porch were a waiting room. 2 suitcases large enough to move houses in, a stack of plastic bags tied tight, a pink sippy cup tipped on its side at the top step. No car in the frame, no idling engine, no quick getaway. A still life called "We Plan to Stay." They hadn't texted last night. They hadn't called to ask if my heart liked surprises. They had, however, read my messages weeks ago. No guests. 30 days of recovery, and returned exactly what you send when you plan to ignore a boundary. "Rest, Dad." I scrolled the thread for the little word that gives people away. Read, there it was. A small admission that this morning wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a rewrite. Bree paced in the camera's fisheye, phone held high as if she could harvest sympathy from the air. Evan stared at the kick plate. The older kid tugged his sleeve and got nothing back. I watched without opening the blinds. This is how you keep your pulse steady while someone else raises theirs. I slid the kettle off the burner before it boiled to roaring. I don't need competing noise. I have a rule I learned too late to have easy muscles for it. Don't answer fast when the other person is loud. Loud has a gravity. It pulls you into its orbit and renames your day. So I stood in my kitchen, palm flat on the cool laminate, and let the volume outside fail to cross the threshold I pay taxes on. The cardiologist didn't need to be here to nod. A text blinked from the only neighbor whose knock wouldn't spike my blood pressure. "Maritza, Evan's place has out-of-state plates in the driveway. New folks moving in yesterday. Airbnb, I read it twice. The sentence placed something heavy and obvious on a table I'd been skirting for a year. Rent out their house, outsource the children, shift the groceries, the rides, the noise, the bedtime to me. Call it helping, call it love, call it family, call it anything except a plan with my body as the line item no one budgeted for. Some memories arrive with a smell. Last winter's party slipped under the door like cheap wine and cologne, laughter scraping the drywall at 10 on a Tuesday while my lungs tried to figure out whether air still belonged to me. Bree's grin when I shuffled out blanket over pajamas was a kind apology she never said out loud. Evan's eyes slid away. "We'll keep it down," she promised to the room. They didn't. The next day, I called a locksmith and pretended I did it for the shed. Outside, Bree lifted her phone higher and widened her voice so it would carry down the block. Porch theater. He changed the locks without telling us. The trick of that sentence is how it implies my house belongs to someone else by default. A neighbor's stroller squeaked past, then slowed. I pictured a glance, a second glance, a tilt of the head toward the scene. I kept the blinds closed. Privacy is a practice, not a feature. I turned the phone face up again. Evan had sent a message so short it left room for everything he didn't want to say. "What are you doing, Dad?" "This looks bad," I let the screen go dark. Looks are a currency when truth is expensive. I'm on a fixed income. I prefer facts. I opened my notebook and wrote a date, a time, and a sentence that tasted like iron. They planned this. The camera timestamp ticked forward. The kids shifted from bored to fussy. One lay back across a suitcase with the full faith of the very young that adults always mean well in the end. I felt the tug to pity and remembered pity has been the handrail others use to climb over your fence. I set the kettle back on, but only until the first whisper rose, enough heat to soften my hands without turning the room into steam. Maritza's next text was a link. The listing photo showed a cheerful living room with bright pillows I didn't recognize and a caption promising mountain mornings and walkable breweries. Host, Evan. Co-host, a name that wasn't his and wasn't mine but used my street address anyway. I took a screenshot, then another of my hospital discharge notes with the boxes checked for rest and no visitors. Paper doesn't shout, it holds. Bree's voice bled through the door now, the muffled vowels of performance. "We're out here with kids," she declared to no one in particular and everyone in earshot. "He won't even open the door." The sentence landed with the weight of accusation shaped to sound like pleading. I leaned against the counter and felt my ribs expand, then settle. Breathing is the smallest way to say I'm still here. Boundaries only mean something if you keep them when it's inconvenient. That's the test. Not on a calm Tuesday when everyone is polite. On a morning when your porch is crowded with expectation and the easiest piece is the kind that costs you more later. So I switched the doorbell chime off and left the camera running. I wrote a second line beneath the first. Not an emergency, an arrangement. I didn't walk to the door. I didn't scroll for arguments I could win and then regret. I stood up straight and reclaimed the square footage between my shoulders. Then I lifted my mug, took the first clean sip of the day, and let the scene outside play without me. When someone else writes your script, the only way off stage is to stop stepping into their light. I stayed in my kitchen and chose my own darkness, which turned out to be perfectly bright. The doorbell began to stutter like a stuck metronome, a bright electronic trill that would rattle a calmer man. I had already silenced the chime after the first round, so only the camera's blue LED pulsed in the corner of the monitor, a lighthouse for a ship I had no intention of guiding in. I wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm, pressed start, and watched the numbers climb and pause and settle. 98/62, pulse steady. I whispered the 4 words at the top of my notebook, breathe, walk, read, rest, and felt the slack return to my shoulders. The morning would not be set by a button on my wall. I called the only technician whose name lives in muscle memory. Rafe Donnelly answered on the second ring, his voice as practical as a toolbox. I told him I wanted a full rekey front, back, garage, and the side door I'd been meaning to upgrade since the winter. He didn't ask for the story. Half an hour out, he said, keep the deadbolt thrown. I said, copy. That was the entire exchange. No drama, just an adult transaction executed at adult speed. While I waited, I opened the notebook to a clean page and wrote the date, the time, the weather, and what the lens saw. 2 grown adults, 2 children, 2 suitcases, 4 plastic bags, 1 pink sippy cup. Clothes, pajama adjacent. Posture, not urgent, not stranded, settled. I saved the current clip from the door camera and named it like a carpenter. Labels parts for a dry fit. Porch _0712 _Bree luggage .mp4. Files are a way of telling the truth in sequence. The van rolled up quiet, white paint dulled by honest miles. Rafe nodded once when I opened the side door and got to work without commentary. He swapped cylinders and pinned new keys, moved to the back, then the garage, then the stubborn side door that had always needed a hip check in winter. I stood in the kitchen out of the shot line and listened to the delicate click of pins finding their new pattern. When he finished, he laid 5 brass keys on the counter like a small fan and printed an invoice from the dash. I paid, he stuck a service sticker inside the jam, and we shook hands the way men do when the job is clean and the boundary is restored. The last sound he left me was the honest click of the front bolt sliding home. It felt like a sentence. I went to the safe and pulled the binder. The zipper's rasp has a way of sharpening thought. Under the Beneficiaries tab, the names read like a decision made by a younger man who still believed proximity guaranteed care. Evan Whitaker and Brianna Whitaker, primary. Brianna designated as guardian of the grandchildren's education funds upon incapacity. In black and white, it made my throat tighten. The medical POA tab yielded another old confidence. Evan as my health proxy. The paper was not wrong when I signed it. It is wrong now. Paper needs to be kept current the way roofs do. Otherwise, storms find the seam. Memory does its own rekeying when you hold certain documents. I saw again the night the hallway filled with strangers and my body filled with pain, the way Bree's smile made "We'll keep it down" sound neighborly while the speakers hummed in the corner. I saw Evan glance at the mantel instead of at me. Those aren't cinematic betrayals. They're soft incursions that take your house by the inch. If you don't mark the inch, the foot goes next. My phone dinged against the countertop. Evan, "Dad, you're making us look bad." I didn't answer. I copied the sentence into my event log, quotation marks and all, and slid the phone into Do Not Disturb. Medical alerts stayed on. Everything else could find a chair outside and wait in the weather. There's a kind of peace that comes from refusing to be the first responder to the fires other people light for effect. Through the lens, Bree had escalated from pacing to performance. She angled her phone toward her own face and announced that they were being abandoned on a doorstep, that I had changed the locks without notice, that her children were cold. None of those statements were about the truth. All of them were about the story. One of the kids took a piece of sidewalk chalk and dragged a long blue ribbon down my front walk. It would take a hose and 20 minutes to lift it later. I put clean chalk on a list I wouldn't touch until my pulse liked the idea. I texted Maritza, "I'm okay. If the noise continues, would you mind calling non-emergency? Please don't engage." She replied with a thumbs up and a sentence that meant more than most promises. "I'm here if you need a witness." That's what community looks like when you strip out the online posture. Quiet people with good timing and better notes. I made tea and moved a chair to a corner where I could see the monitor without hearing much of the outside. It is a learned discipline to be available to fact and unavailable to noise. I wrote a line under my timeline. Boundary means enforcement, not apology. Then I added a second line I didn't have the nerve to write a year ago. I will not negotiate at the door. I did not change the legal pages yet. Heart first, then house, then paper. In that order, my life remains habitable. But I slid a yellow sticky into the binder and wrote, "Call Diego Alvarez, update beneficiaries, revoke POA, set education fund oversight, external." I took photos of the current pages so the before could stand beside the after when I got there. I created a checklist, small boxes waiting for ink. Revoke co-access, refit grandchild funds, add boundary clause. Outside, the script continued without me. Inside, the lock answered with that simple mechanical no I had paid good money to hear. The adrenaline ebbed. The kettle cooled. I could feel my chest loosen around a breath that went all the way to the bottom. "Not today," I said to the empty room, and it wasn't bravado. It was inventory. The distance between their plan and my life was now a fitted key. I didn't need them to understand. I needed the documents to stand between us with the same quiet authority as the door I had just closed. If you're still watching and connecting with this, drop one in the comments. Keep your seat. One detail will flip the story on its head. By daylight, we played our parts. I walked the grandkids around the block, read the street trees like trail markers, and waved at neighbors who liked the brochure idea of 3 generations under one roof. I thanked Brooke for soup I didn't taste. I tidied the garage corner, aligning chisels so precisely it looked like a photograph of work rather than work. At night, we moved life in inches. Passports slid into inner pockets. Insurance cards were photographed and folded into Nora's wallet. Pills were portioned into silent sleeves set beneath the socks. The USB of family photos vanished into the inside of my belt with a strip of tape. The ledger took on a second life. Not boats, not joints, just steps, dates, and the small logistics of leaving without setting off alarms. Close to midnight on the third night, the house settled into its engineered breathing, and we shouldered the duffel and the wheeled bag. I guided Nora past the hinge that complains, the sensor that blinks twice, the shallow fourth step on the back stair. In the kitchen, I set our guest key on the island beside a folded note that said only thank you, leave clean. That was the rule. The door clicked once. Rain waited outside, a soft applause that hid footsteps and second thoughts. The Cedar Greyhound at night is a warehouse for hours. Under fluorescent fatigue, we found 2 chairs that wobbled in opposite directions. Security swept like weather no one controls. On the ledger's last page, I did the math that keeps fear from inventing numbers. 1,280 from the tools I'd sold, 180 from Nora's side gig, 1,660, 2 morning fares already earmarked. Coffee, toast, rain. Motels at 60 to 70 a night meant 2 weeks before zero. Assigning numbers shrank the panic into something that could be stacked and counted. A man in a faded department jacket stopped when he saw my Tillamook cap. He had the posture of someone who'd carried more weight than this night. He traded us 2 aisle seats for a back pair so Scout could curl at our feet and slid a bottle of water toward Nora as if it were nothing. "Name's Eli," he said. I nodded. "Henry." He said good luck, like a benediction without church, and it landed kinder than any sermon. The terminal closes to non-travelers for a slice of the night. We needed a place to be. 2 blocks east, a diner held its lights the way a lighthouse keeps its beam steady. Inside, coffee steamed honest. The bell over the door rang without irony, and the vinyl booths remembered the shape of other nights. My blood pressure reminded me about the pill I had buried under layers of caution. The room tilted. Nora already had a sleeve in her coat pocket for exactly this. The bitter disc sat on my tongue like a coin. Water, breath. The tilt leveled. Small foresight is a kind of wealth. We weighed destinations the way you weigh lumber, for straightness, strength, and what it will carry. Big cities were visible and expensive. Small towns with tides stretched dollars and hid people by making them belong. Pine Harbor sounded like a place that might learn our names without needing our histories. I bought 2 early tickets with the care of cutting a tenon. No slop, no do-overs. I wrote the name in the ledger and felt the word take weight. The woman at the counter noticed Scout's bowl under our table and chose not to notice the suitcases. Her name tag said Marisol. "Sit as long as you need if you keep a plate on the table," she said, already moving away. By the register, a corkboard waited for people who still believe community can be stapled up. A grease pencil had scrawled on a torn scrap, "Ben Thuyen needs repairs. Cash. Ask for Ray. Oxygen" in 3 words. I copied the number and circled it twice on the ledger margin. We still needed somewhere to ride out the hours until first light. Marisol made 2 phone calls and handed me a sticky note with a church address. "Pastor Lila will meet you," she said. The hall smelled like floor wax and hymnals, the kind of clean that takes time. She opened the door, set 2 blankets on a stack of folded chairs, and didn't ask questions that would cost us dignity to answer. Scout turned twice and lay down with a sigh a ship would understand. The lights dimmed to the color of rest. Before sleep undid the knots, Eli leaned in the doorway, voice kept low for the sanctity of borrowed rooms. "I pulled a quick look at public filings for your son's company," he said. "Your name rang a bell." He paused, measuring whether I couldn't see. "There's an SBA loan with a co-guarantor listed as Henry Malloy." I felt the temperature drop as if someone had opened an unseen door. "I never signed that," I said. He watched my face the way firefighters watch the wind. "Figured you should know." Oh. The room felt smaller but clearer. I added a new line to the ledger. "Check SBA records." Then I put the pen away. We would not fight phantom paperwork at 2 in the morning on borrowed blankets. First we reach Pine Harbor, then we find Ray. Then we earn 3 clean nights under a roof that doesn't mind if you smell like rain. Dawn thinned the windows until the glass went the color of milk. We stood into our plan not because it was brave, but because it was the next thing that could be done. Dawn in Pine Harbor poured over the water like milk tipped from a blue bottle. I stepped off the bus and heard the harbor speak its plain language, gulls heckling, a halyard ticking a metal beat against a mast, a diesel throat clearing somewhere beyond the bait shop. Tar and kelp rode the air together, a union I've always trusted more than any sales pitch. Scout sniffed, squared his shoulders, and settled as if the brine itself told him there were rules here he could understand. The ledger in my jacket felt heavier with the word I'd written last night, Pine Harbor, as if ink could add ballast. We found Ray where Marisol's note said he'd be, a hat with salt stains, a jaw like a piece of knotty oak, boots planted near a stack of gray planks. He pointed with his chin at the dock's soft section and handed me a pry bar. I tested the first board and felt the rot give under the nail head. It was the honest kind of failure, no tricks. I lifted, sistered a joist, set stainless screws until they bit and sang. Ray watched without commentary, then counted cash from a folded envelope and slapped it into my palm like payment and handshake in one. "If you show tomorrow," he said, "there's more." The only answer that felt right was showing tomorrow. Gull and Tide held its windows full of morning. Inside, the griddle's music mixed with coffee steam and the cinnamon that means something sweet is near. Marisol slid 2 bowls of chowder onto our table like we'd been earning them for years, then casually moved us to a booth along the wall where Scout could tuck under and not draw anyone's rules. No pity, no performance. My shoulders let down a notch I hadn't noticed they were holding. I told her the neon gull on her sign stuttered in the wind. "If you can reach it," she said, "it's yours." I took that as permission and as a test. Pastor Lila came by with a nurse from a clinic you'd miss if you didn't already know how to look for help. Blood pressure cuff, steady questions, a pencil scratch in a small notebook that didn't feel like a report to be weaponized. We reconciled pills and wrote a path to refills that didn't depend on anyone's goodwill in Portland. Competence without theater lowers an inner temperature you forget you've been carrying. When they left, Nora's shoulders sat easier under her sweater. Mine did, too. By noon, the wind had picked up, restless as a boy on the last day of school. I went up the diner's side ladder with a meter in my pocket and a small tool roll. The neon transformer was losing the thread on its ground. A conduit saddle had loosened. Salt does its work on everything, even light. I reseated, tightened, weatherproofed. When the gull outline held steady, a man at the counter clapped once and then returned to his plate. Marisol didn't say, "Good job." She slid a pie slice in front of Nora and gave me a nod that meant more than praise ever does. Mid-afternoon, she asked almost as an aside if I might look at a loose stair tread, and while I was at it, whether the small room above the kitchen would scare me away with onion smell. "Month to month," she said, "cheap." We didn't accept. We traded nods and left the keys for future doors where we could see them. Dignity does better when choices come dressed as questions, not rescues. We counted cash at dusk. Ray's envelope plus what we had left from the ledger made a number big enough to cover days, not weeks. Nora sketched a simple menu in the margin. Beans, eggs, chowder twice if needed, and I penciled a dock diagram with the next run of screws and how many to pre-drill. Scout exhaled like a bellows at our feet. The wind carried a buoy bell through the alley and set it in my chest where Faith used to sit. The bell over the diner door rang against a gust, and Colin stood there in a coat glazed with sea mist. In a month, he'd acquired the look of someone who sleeps in a chair and calls it a bed. Relief and dread arrived together on his face. Marisol read the room like she'd been hired for this scene and flipped a small sign that told the world we closed early. We moved to the back booth. Nora's hand found mine under the table and held what had to be held. He started with breath instead of words, then the words found him. Brooke's been building a case, he said, eyes on the wood grain because it stayed put. The doctor, the lawyer. I didn't understand the full extent, he paused. I avoided understanding. He did not ask us to come back. He said the kids missed us, and he said it like a confession, not a bargaining chip. He sounded like a man learning the shape of his own spine and hating the math of it. I kept my voice level and placed a single question on the table like a tool I might need later. There's an SBA loan that lists me as co-guarantor. Why does my name appear? He flinched like the word had more edge than I'd swung. I thought it was intent paperwork, he said. Brooke handled the forms. I let the next sentence sit between us like cold iron. I didn't sign. We did not escalate. We marked the line where metal meets wood and leaves a true seam. I'm not going back, I said, not now. Nora added, if you want to see us, you can come here where we live our lives. Colin nodded, not in victory or defeat, just in recognition that terrain is real, whether or not you prefer another map. He stood without drama. I'll call before bringing the kids, he said. The bell sounded smaller when the door shut behind him, like a note held under water. Marisol set down hot water and left without hovering. A text from Lila blinked. Here if needed. Outside, the harbor wind worked the diner's vent until it shivered and then settled. I opened the ledger and wrote 2 lines that read more like vows than notes. Cullen came alone, we stay. The paper took the ink the way seasoned wood takes oil, without fuss, made better for it. We stepped into the lane. The neon gull held steady, a small bird of light convincing itself it could ride this weather. I put my palm against the diner's brick and felt the sun it had kept all afternoon. Tomorrow the dock would still need screws, the stair tread would still be loose, and the room above the kitchen would still be waiting for an answer. The shock of the day hadn't spent itself, but the ground under us wasn't borrowed anymore. It belonged enough for us to stand on it and call it ours. I woke to the mingled smells of dock water and onions riding the air vent from the diner kitchen below. It was the kind of warmth a building makes when people are already working, not the programmed comfort of a thermostat. Knees stiff, shoulder a little cranky, I sat up into honest fatigue and poured coffee into 2 paper cups. Nora spread the ledger between us on the windowsill and drew a small box around 3 words: housing, health, council. Like coordinates, outside the neon gull we'd steadied yesterday held its line against a sullen morning wind. Pine Harbor wasn't asking us to be brave, it was asking us to act. We said yes to the room above the kitchen. The stair was narrow and spoke in one place, a single step with a loose nail I promised to set by noon. The banister had been polished by decades of hands. The window looked over the square where 2 pickups idled and argued in diesel. The floor hummed faintly with the walk-in cooler's compressor, steady, serviceable, proof that things were being kept. Marisol slid a key across the counter and with it a short, dignified arrangement, month to month, rent reduced in exchange for morning baking, help from Nora, and repairs from me. It felt like trade, not rescue. I put the key in my pocket and my breath settled a notch. We built a rhythm before we moved in the second stack of folded shirts. Nora traced out dough timings with the calm of a librarian rebuilding a card catalog. Starter at 5, roll, proof, bake, muffins by 7, cinnamon twists if the weather demanded comfort. I made a repair list. Stair tread, the prep sink's slow weep, a back door that swelled on damp days and stuck at the strike plate. Work is a language, and the sentences here were short and sensible. We didn't talk much. Flour dust and stainless screws said what needed saying. Health had to be more than hope. Pastor Lila made a call, and by late morning we sat in an exam room with a window at shoulder height and the careful smell of antiseptic. A local GP ran us through MOCA and MMSE, his pen tapping a slow metronome on the clipboard. I named animals, counted backward, drew a clock that looked like a clock. Nora's recall was crisp enough that the doctor grinned. "Stay off the internet self-diagnosis," he said, making a tiny joke of the whole machine. We left with small medication adjustments, printed notes establishing current cognitive capacity, and a sense that the ground under our feet had stopped shifting, at least on this front. Counsel came with tar rope in the stairwell because Dax and Gwen's office sat above the bait shop. He wore a neat shirt and a fisherman's patience. No billboards, no theatrics. He listened until the room felt bigger, then laid out a plan in 4 clicks. Document capacity, preserve evidence, create notarized signature specimens, and send nothing loud unless we had to. "No direct contact," he said, and slid across a 1-page instruction sheet for when phones start ringing. His tone was precise without being cold. I realized how thirsty I'd been for sentences that did not overpromise. He called in a mobile notary who knocked like a neighbor. Rebecca Hale had stamped grant papers for our ranger station back when windstorms still made the news. Memory put a human frame around procedure. She watched my pen as I signed my name in a quiet room and pressed her seal with a click that felt like a boundary snapping back into place. Specimens dated, witnessed, packaged. My name, once a thing to be used, became itself again. Dax opened a laptop and asked if we were ready to look at what had been said about us. Brooke had shared incident clips with the doctor, glossy files named for concern. He brought up a waveform and rolled it back and forth with a fingertip. Time-based mismatches blinked like mislaid stitches. Consonants landed in the seam between cuts. The same room tone appeared twice where no room breathes, exactly the same way. "This is edited," he said, not performing certainty, just pointing at it. Then he played a raw ring from a doorbell cam a neighbor had consented to share, a stray capture from a hallway in Portland. Brooke's voice drifted in before the scene it supposedly belonged to, coaching the kids to repeat a line about Grandma getting confused. It wasn't a smoking gun, it was a hand on the holster. We didn't file anything. Dax saved checksums, logged chain of custody, wrote a memo in clean stacked paragraphs. "Evidence sits better when it's not angry," he said. I understood the craft in that. You can split a joint if you drive the peg before the glue has gripped. Back in the room, we wrote rules the way Rangers write fire line orders. All contact through counsel, no unannounced visits. Any device or camera proposal refused in writing with reasons. Rage wanted a longer list. Discipline cut it to 3 and made them legible. We copied the rules onto an index card and taped it inside the cupboard where we would see them before we answered any door. That night, we wrote letters to June and Arlo by the window where the square's streetlight paled the page. We told them about Scout learning which goals to ignore and which to admire, about dough rising like a trick worth believing in, about a small neon bird that remembered how to hold steady after a storm. We didn't blame, we offered coordinates. I sketched a fat-bellied skiff with a crooked smile and gave it a name only they would understand. Ray stopped by with a sack of stainless screws he called extras and left them without a lecture. Marisol slid a dish of labeled keys under our door, back alley, supply closet, sign switch, each one a vote of confidence. Lila texted clinic hours and nothing else. Belonging here came as tasks and tools, not as speeches about family or duty. We named what we'd do next and what we wouldn't. Next, request our medical records from Portland, ask for SBA loan copies through proper channels, schedule a follow-up with Dax, keep receipts, sleep. Not argue online, return to talk it out. Let fear plan the week. Writing the 2 lists side by side put the day back in our hands. Night came gentler than it used to. Onion warmth rose through the floorboards. I cracked the window to let in a draft of brine, set my block plane spare iron on the sill like a crescent of cooled moon, and opened the ledger to a new column titled Stay. The neon goal hummed its clean outline across the square, and for the first time in months, I felt the word home arrive without needing anyone else to sign it. If you're still watching and the tension feels real, comment 1 to show you're with me. Don't blink. One decision will close a door and open another. Morning came with the compressor's steady thrum and a gull's heckle threading the square. Onion warmth rose through the floorboards, and I let it settle my breath while Nora tied her apron and reached for flour. We kept our rhythm on purpose. She at dough and proofing racks, me at the repair list taped to the cooler. Phones began a nervous dance on the windowsill. Unknown numbers, voicemails delivered in a tone that wanted credit for caring. I didn't answer. I taped our rules of engagement card to the door at eye level and read the 3 lines like a catechism before touching any latch. Out back, the diner's sticky strike plate needed honesty more than force. I planed the swollen edge, reseated screws, and tested the swing until the latch met the keeper like it had remembered how. Stainless bit clean and the sound of a door closing true steadied something inside me the calls were trying to shake. Scout slept under the prep table, one paw twitching as if he were running along the harbor trail. Marisol slid coffee to my elbow and went on taking orders as if the world outside the window were background weather and not the point. The smear arrived inside a patron's palm. He held a phone like bad news carries weight and angled it toward the counter. A post had spread. Cropped photos, a hero narrative about saving confused elders coerced by strangers. The language was syrup and venom at once. Comments piled, advice, outrage, threats dressed as prayers. 2 calls hit the diner's line in quick succession, voices trying on pity like a costume. Marisol flipped the ringer off and pinned a handwritten note by the register, "We don't discuss private lives," then moved on to refill coffee. Silence became a shield we could stand behind. Dax moved faster than the feed. Before lunch, he sent a cease and desist and a preservation letter to Brooke, the doctor, and the lawyer she'd been courting. Takedown requests flew with hashes attached. Platform holds went out to anyone hosting the edited clips. His instructions to us were blunt in the best way. Do not post, do not debate, save every log. I wrote the timestamps in the ledger, the page starting to look like a ship's log under storm. The door knocked early afternoon with a rhythm that wasn't customers. 2 officers stood in the alley light, hats polite, posture careful. A wellness check had been requested, anonymous, urgent. I met them on the tile where flour turns footprints white. Pastor Lila arrived at my shoulder. By coincidence, that was probably planned. IDs, Dax's card, the doctor's capacity note. They asked to see where we slept, looked at the stairs, glanced at the workboard, noted the bakery hours, and wrote an incident number that sounded like one too many. They left with nods and a hint of relief. I logged the number as if it were a knot tied on a line I might need to find again by feel. Lunch rush tested the room's balance. Regulars tipped heavier than plates warranted and kept their opinions between napkin and pocket. A fisherman folded a scrap and slid it across to me without commentary. Dock gate chain squeaks. Bring oil. In a day that wanted spectacle, that note was a benediction. I added oil can to the tool bag and found the chain at dusk. A few drops and a patient hand took the groan out of the link. Mid-afternoon, Dax called from the bait shop stairs, where the air carries rope and salt. Brooke's lawyer had filed for an ex parte emergency guardianship in Multnomah County, alleging immediate risk. He'd caught it on the e-docket, dialed into the quick hearing, and placed our capacity notes and the metadata memo where the judge could see. The order was denied. The transcript picked up a word I hadn't expected a courtroom to adopt for us, tampering, and suggested any refile carry an independent evaluator's report. I let the phone rest against my breastbone for one slow count and then wrote a line in the ledger that felt like keel weight returning. Within the hour, the bank called from a number that knows how to make your stomach drop. A fraud analyst in a voice that lived between apology and procedure said someone had attempted an address change and to add me as co-responsible on a credit line tied to the SBA trail. I confirmed the attempt was unauthorized. They set a freeze across bureaus and flagged SSA and the pension administrator. The analyst gave me a reference number and the feeling of a door closing before a wind could push through. I wrote both down and underlined the phrase active financial exploitation because naming a thing fixes it to the page and keeps it from roaming your chest. A text reached Dax from Colin, brief and shaped differently than his old silences. He hadn't authorized the filing or the bank actions. He was locking down devices and requesting copies of whatever Brooke had submitted in his name. It wasn't absolution. It was motion toward a spine. I let myself notice it and then turned back to the stair tread that still needed resetting because wood doesn't wait well on human epiphanies. Stress remembered my knee by late afternoon. A nurse at the clinic checked my pressure, raised an eyebrow, and adjusted timing with the calm of someone steering a small boat through a known chop. Nora walked me along the harbor until the buoy bell settled the numbers in my head, if not on the machine. We named the fear without letting it own anything, then returned to the heat and noise of work where worries can't shout over the mixer. By evening, the town had quietly built a perimeter. Ray installed a new hasp at the dock gate without charge and left his driver to deliver the bill later with a wink. Lila positioned 2 volunteers near the diner phone to field anything ugly. Marisol showed us the back alley exit plan, not like a drama, but a map that assumed calm feet. Interlocking hands, doors, phones, hasps, made a ring around the day. Upstairs, we logged what happened and what would happen next. Wellness check number, docket info bank reference, takedown receipts. Tomorrow's list, finish planing the back door, mail the letters to June and Arlo, request SBA copies formally, verify freezes, schedule the independent evaluator the judge suggested show up to work. We did not plan revenge, we planned maintenance. The neon gull held steady beyond the glass, a drawn breath I could match. I set the block plane iron back on the sill, edged toward the window like a compass point, and wrote a single line across the ledger's bottom. Pressure is weather, we are Hull. Morning arrived with the easy duet I've come to trust. Onion warmth breathing up through the floor, and the neon gull outside holding its clean outline against a washed sky. Before reading any messages, I took the oil can to the dock gate, worked the new hasp ray installed yesterday, and let the chain swallow a few slow drops. The squeal flattened into a polite whisper. Beginning with a fix I could feel gave the day a spine. Back upstairs, Marisol set a thin folder on our little table. The lease was 4 paragraphs and a signature block, not a trap disguised as help. Month to month, she said, tapping the line with a pen. Cheap, and I added 1 clause for your peace, no cameras or devices without consent. I read every word aloud to Nora the way I used to read trail advisories before fire season. We initialed margins, signed our names, and swapped copies for a receipt. The moment ink hit paper, the room's edges softened. The upstairs stopped feeling borrowed and started answering to home. I wrote lease executed in the ledger and underlined it like you'd shore a beam. Work needed shape too. Marisol slid over 2 one-pagers. Nora's laid out morning baking hours and a shift meal. Mine spelled a rate, materials passed through, and a standing list of maintenance targets. I hung a clipboard with a calendar beside the stair. Nora posted her bake schedule under it in a neat hand. The diner answered by becoming more itself. Proofing baskets marched in rows, the back door swung like it remembered how, and the clatter of breakfast plates became a rhythm we could join. Dax called mid-morning to say the independent evaluator could see us by noon in the county over. We found the clinic with salt dried on our coats and filled out forms in a quiet room where pens clicked and paper rasped. Dr. Imani Rutherford had the calm of someone who refuses to be hurried by other people's panic. Trails A and B, Mosier, clock draw, story recall. I named the animals and told the short tail back with enough detail to satisfy my own pride. Nora handled the memory lists like a veteran librarian. I'll issue a report within a week, Dr. Rutherford said, voice even. You're both in good shape. It wasn't flattery, it was a measurement, and I felt taller for having been measured. Afterward, we crossed the street to the post office with a stack of certified letters. Requests for the SBA loan package copies, the bank's application trail, SSA address verification, pension administrator alerts, a paper perimeter drawn in registered ink. I verified credit freezes at all 3 bureaus and added fraud alerts set to call Dax before they called me. The clerk's rubber stamp thudded down each time like a small shield hammered onto a larger one. In the ledger, I taped the slips and wrote "sent," then the date, then a line I've learned to love. Wait for the packet. Do not speculate. The SBA portal showed document image pending, which meant a breadcrumb existed even if I hadn't held it yet. Dax flagged the next steps: signature comparison, IP metadata, custody history, so my mind didn't invent its own evidence to fill the silence. Beside that note, I wrote only, "Keep working." Ray appeared around 2 with a coil of tarred line and an offer. "Half day a week for peer inspections," he said. "Storm prep call list too. You in?" I said I was. He handed me a worn brass key to the supply cage, and it jingled like trust. His chisel edge looked tired, so I sharpened it on the spot and passed it back without commentary. He nodded, and we went on with our day. Back at the diner, we packed 2 envelopes addressed in Nora's careful print. The letters to June and Arlo carried harbor stories instead of arguments: a gull that figured out crosswind, a dog learning which boats to greet, a cinnamon twist that accidentally came out like a knot. Dax relayed them to Colin with delivery instructions and no room for spin. That evening, through Dax, a single photo arrived: June's drawing of a gull and scout under a big blue sky, Arlo's stick boat with our initials scrawled on the hull. We answered with a postcard that said as little as it needed to say and exactly as much as love requires. We used the last hour of light to build a timeline in Dax's office above the bait shop. The stairwell smelled like rope and old salt. His conference table smelled like fresh manila and toner. We read the ledger into clean sentences, dates, phrases, calls, docket hits. Pastor Lila and Marisol came up one at a time, signed short affidavits about the wellness check and the prank calls, and left without adding commentary. Evidence grew in boxes with labels and a chain of custody log that weighed more with each initial. "Please don't engage online," Dax said. "Paper is the narrative that lasts." The local GP saw us late afternoon for a check and a word. My knee got a glance and a better plan. Blood pressure timing shifted a notch. He printed a note: stable, compliant, working, and I stapled it behind Dr. Rutherford's pending report in the binder Dax gave us. It looked plain there, which is how I prefer important things to look. At home, we practiced 2 scripts until they felt like muscle memory. "Please contact our attorney, Mr. Nguyen," and "no consent to record." We taped them by the phone and the downstairs door because panic steals nouns and verbs if you let it. Then we turned back to the tasks that hold a day together. I reset the loose stair tread with glue and screws sunk below flush. Nora's cinnamon twist sold out before 10 and left sugar drifting in the air like quiet confetti. Regulars left order notes folded around cash, not opinions. The register closed without anyone asking for a story we weren't selling. After supper, we made a 3-week plan. We penciled target dates, evaluator report return, SBA and bank packets, SSA confirmation, first rent due on the lease, raise storm drill. We left a weekend open at the edge of the calendar for a supervised visit if Colin stayed steady. The plan didn't try to solve months, it offered a path through days. In the Windows soft square, I slid my notarized signature page into a plastic sleeve and laid the block plane iron across the binder like a straight edge that says, "Make it true." Then I wrote one clean line across the ledger. We build, we keep proof, we leave the rest to time. I begin the day with tools before I allow answers in. The backhaul hinge takes one thin kiss of oil. The neon gull outside gets a glance to be sure its outline holds. Ray's tarred line gets a tidy figure 8 around a cleat. The harbor keeps time with halyards and gull calls. On the upstairs table, the binder sits open. Rings ready. Ledger waiting. There is a right order to steadying yourself, and mine starts with work I can feel in my hands. Dax arrives with a manila envelope and a face that does not rehearse outcomes on your behalf. He places Dr. Amani Rutherford's report in front of me, signed in blue ink. Subtests, scores, narrative impressions. The phrases land like ballast. Oriented, coherent, reliable historian, no evidence of major neurocognitive disorder. He forwards it to the Multnomah clerk and our former doctor and asks, in writing, for an addendum acknowledging receipt. I slide our copy into a plastic sleeve and breathe in a way I haven't in months. Measurements don't love you, they hold you up anyway. The mail brings the heavier bite. A certified packet from the lender carries the SBA loan package, application, guarantor pages, e-sign, audit log. My name appears in a hand that mimics mine the way a photocopy fakes light. Baseline drift wrong, downstrokes too eager, pressure rising where I relax. The audit metadata lists submission from Colin's home IP on a date stamped in my head as the night we were on a library video call showing the grandkids Rusty's trick. Session user, assistant. I don't let myself narrate. I underline discrepancies and, in Dax's memo, sign a precise sentence. I did not consent to or execute this guarantee. Proof is a quiet blade. Remediation flips like a switch Dax had ready. He files an SBA fraud charge forgery declaration with attachments, sends banks a correction packet, our notarized specimens, evaluator report, audit anomalies, and requests freeze and segregation of any liability tied to the tainted line. He moves the clerk to note the forgery in the same docket where the ex parte was denied. Each step produces copies. Each copy lands in the binder like a brace under a shelf that had been sagging. Our former doctor sends a brief addendum before lunch. It is not poetry. Withdraws earlier informal concerns, pending independent evaluation. The sentence is a plank set back in the span. Dax files it alongside Dr. Rutherford's report, and I feel the narrative shape change inside the system, which is where shape matters. Online, the heat cools. The takedowns hold. Prank calls taper to a final few that bump against Marisol's off switch and die. By the register, she posts a typed notice the size of a recipe card. We support dignified aging. We also serve pie. The diner returns to its true business, coffee refills, order chits, the soft percussion of plates stacked in a hurry without breaking. Afternoon swings in on a salty wind and the bell over the door. Colin stands there with June's mittened hand in his and Arlo already stepping forward, momentum made of 4-year-old certainty. They don't wait for scripts. They hit our chests with small, decisive arms, and the room decides to be a room that holds. Marisol tips the back in 30 sign at the door and ushers the regulars out with 2 go-cups nobody complains about. We take the back booth. Colin keeps his eyes on the table grain. I avoided what I didn't want to see, he says. I let Brooke build a story and lent it my silence. I didn't vet the clips, the guardianship filing, my name's on it. The loan, she handled the forms. I didn't sign, but I didn't stop it. He doesn't spread blame like butter. He says he is working with Dax on device custody and unwinding whatever exposure he created. I nod once. Boundaries need nouns. Visits happen here, I say. No contact with Brooke. Logistics through counsel, Nora adds, no surprises. He agrees, not as a favor, but as recognition of terrain. Grandparenting resumes where performance stops. We present June with the postcard she drew, now framed in a cheap frame that looks like a jewel in her hands. Arlo glues a popsicle stick skiff and seats a single stainless screw into a pilot hole while my thumb steadies the driver. Scout leans against their knees until his hips remember age and he lowers himself with dignity. Nora shows dough blooming under a towel. The children watch as if seeing weather arrive. Dax drafts a letter that sits exactly where leverage lives. If the corrections hold, the voided loan, a guardianship withdrawn with prejudice, a written retraction to the doctor, we won't file. If not, we will. He doesn't posture. He stacks facts and dates and gives them a place to stand. We choose leverage over spectacle because spectacle only feeds itself. The town renders its verdict the way towns do when they mean it, without speeches. Pastor Lila stops by and pays for 4 hot chocolates nobody needs to drink right then. Ray waves the kids onto the safe part of the dock and hands Arlo a length of harmless line to learn a cleat hitch. A fisherman lifts 2 fingers from his cup in greeting, and the gesture lands as permission to keep breathing. By evening, the emails arrive like knots relaxing. The bank confirms the forged line is voided, address lock set, monitoring in place. The SBA acknowledges an active fraud review and suspends any obligations tied to the forged guarantee. SSA confirms our freeze and alerts. I write unwind in progress in the ledger and notice a place in my chest let go of something it had been carrying like a beam. After Colin drives the kids back, with Dax informed and a next date penciled, we sit at the little table upstairs and list what changes. Monthly visits here on the calendar, photo mail routed through council, not platforms, no direct messages, no surprise arrivals. A door stays ajar for Colin because doors, to be useful, have hinges. The pass doesn't get a key. Night wraps the square in the color neon invents. Cinnamon sugar hovers in a warmth that makes sense. I set the block plane iron across the binder's spine like a straight edge insisting on true lines. Then I write the final line for the day in the ledger that saved us from shouting, "We held the line, we kept the proof, we chose our weather." The day begins the way I want most days to begin now, with work small enough to finish and important enough to matter. I touch the neon goals switch and listen for its even hum, a thin wire of light holding the morning together. I run a fingertip under the backhaul hinge and feel the faint oil sheen from yesterday. The door closes true without thinking about it. Downstairs, the first oven cycle warms the air, sugar and coffee rising together until the room smells like a place that makes sense. On the sill, the ledger lies half-filled with entries that read more like building than defending. Stair tread, dock gate, notarized copy filed, letters mailed, visit set. I close my hands over the paper a second, the way you steady a board before the cut, and let my breath take its cue. Agency at my age doesn't look like victory. It looks like habits I can repeat. The scripts hang by the phone in the downstairs door, simple as safety rules. Please contact our attorney, Mr. Nguyen. No consent to record. Copies go into sleeves the day they're made. Receipts get paper-clipped before they wander. I sit down when the knee says sit. I go outside after lunch because oxygen changes the kind of thoughts you have. It's not heroic, and that is the point. I don't need to feel exceptional. I need to keep the day from tilting. That much I can manage. The hard lines we drew turned out to be a form of care. I used to think boundaries were fences you built for keeping people out. Now I see them as the frame that lets love hold its shape. The no surprise rule, the council-only contact, the visits on a calendar instead of a whim, those weren't punishments. They were lanes with painted stripes so the kids could be driven safely between homes. We drew lines so they could color inside them. On Sundays, we take a short video call. When Colin's eyes search my face for something I could hand him, I let the silence sit a beat longer than comfort. "We're here," I say. "Next visit is the 18th. The sentence does enough. It leaves the rest to the plan. I had a long season when outrage called itself action. The posts I didn't make are a ledger of their own. Paper is slower and heavier and somehow kinder. The evaluator's report, the notarized signatures, the SBA packet with its wrong pressure on my name, those pages change the weather without asking me to perform my pain. When I slid Dr. Rutherford's signed report into a sleeve and clicked the binder ring shut, I felt the breath return in a measured length I could trust. Proof isn't loud. It holds. The town has been the court that mattered. No proclamations, no carved plaques, just Marisol's quiet sign by the register and the way she set hot water down the day we needed it. Ray adding me to the storm drill and handing over the supply cage key without speech. Lila's volunteers who kept a watch by the phone and never asked to be thanked. A fisherman's two-finger salute that arrived like a verdict. Reputation here is repaired the way docks are, by showing up with tools, by tightening hardware that had been left to rattle, by keeping an eye on weather that is everyone's problem. Marriage, in the long run, turns out to be a duet you rescore as the instruments change. Nora's flower on the sleeve of her sweater, my palm under the tray's lip as we turn together at the door, a wordless transfer that keeps the rolls from sliding. She checks the timing on my pills the way you check the oven light, a glance, a nod. I walk the alley while the first sheet bakes and come back with a better knee and a cheaper heart rate. In the evenings, we read the kids' letters aloud. I try to keep my voice even and fail in tiny ways that nobody needs to fix. If there's a twist left in this story, it's a quiet one. The escape was also a return. Leaving the optimized glass house delivered me back to the unoptimized self I trust. The one with a block plane iron on the sill, a ledger under the hand, a dog whose gait matches mine, a day shaped by the things that set and cure. I didn't reinvent. I retrieved. The parts of me that had been treated as liabilities, stubborn care for detail, a dislike of shortcuts, the need to understand how the hinge moves, turned back into assets when the work asked for them. If I were to pass along a tool list to a future self or anyone who needs it, it would be short. Keep your dignity in daily practice, not speeches. Draw lines early and treat them as care. Keep proof. Paper outlasts noise. Accept help that preserves your agency and give help that preserves someone else's. Keep working at something you can finish before lunch. The near horizon looks like a calendar square. June's newest drawing, Scout in heroic proportion, gulls carefully shaped, hangs in a plastic frame by the coffee station, bright as a flag. Arlo's cleat hitch has improved. Ray says he's got the turn right even when nobody is watching. A postcard went out yesterday with a doc sketch and 3 words that belong to us alone. We plan a visit when school pauses. The rules sit at the edge of the plan like guardrails, visible enough to keep us from pretending gravity is negotiable. Afternoon cools the window glass until the neon looks like a small stove on the other side of the square. I open the ledger to a fresh page and write TOMORROW in a blockish hand that always looks younger than I am. The binder rings click once when I set the notarized signature copy back in its place. The sound is unremarkable and beautiful. I lay the block plane iron across the top margin like a straight edge, not because the line will be long, but because I want the first cut true. Somewhere outside, a buoy bell pulls a single note through the air. The door closes the way a door should. I write one clean line, oil door, prep dough, call Dax with SSA confirmation, and let the rest of the evening run on the warmth of sugar and the steady breath of the harbor. When we click the lights off, the gull keeps its shape in the window, and I recognize the quiet for what it is. Not an absence of trouble, but the presence of a life we've chosen and built, one small proof-backed task at a time. In the quiet after the storm, what remains is the shape of a life reclaimed. Not every bruise becomes a banner, not every slight needs a stage. What lasts is the practice of choosing. Guard the small gates that make a home. Tell the truth even when no one is tallying. Strength is less a roar than a rhythm, steady steps, honest records, a refusal to be drafted into someone else's script. Some endings don't ask for applause. They ask for maintenance. Oil the hinge, return the call in daylight. These ordinary acts disarm the machinery that turns grievances into destinies. The essential lesson is simple. Care with edges keeps care from becoming control. Mercy without memory becomes denial. Memory without mercy becomes punishment. Wisdom lives between them, where facts are kept and boundaries hold. In that middle ground, the old script of family revenge stories begins to loosen. Pain was real. Purpose grows larger than payback. Survival is not the ceiling. It is the floor on which better rooms can be built. We never undo the past, but we can refuse to rehearse it. Each morning offers the chance to take a truer role. Repair, document, and treat love as a promise with terms. When healing is a craft, not a courtroom, the echo of family revenge stories grows faint, replaced by continuity. Meals cooked, bills paid. The work is small, but it is sovereign. If this closing found you at a crossroads, let it offer a handrail. Keep proof without keeping score, draw lines early and kindly, and let time temper justice into peace. And when the chorus of family revenge stories returns, as echoes do, answer with evidence, with steadiness, with a life arranged around what you can bless. Thank you for reading. Share your thoughts in the comments. What felt true to you? Your perspective may be the map someone else needs. If this resonated, subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapter. Your support keeps this channel going. Be well, keep records, and keep your light steady.